I am convinced that no one can bring out the best or the worst in us quite like our families. Siblings, in my experience, are masters of this. If you have sisters or brothers, you know what I mean. If you are an only child, you have probably assembled folks around you who can do this for you. My own family gets along just fine, and we range in age from 38 to 54, and the right words in a family gathering can plunge us straight back to adolescence. Arrested adolescence is territory that Jacob would be well familiar with. He'd be very comfortable in the territory of arrested adolescence. As I said, you wouldn't want to do business with Jacob. Jacob tricked and double-crossed his older twin brother Esau over and over until finally Esau was breathing murder and Jacob had to go on the lam. It is a story of vanity and violence that makes the most dysfunctional of families look like a Norman Rockwell painting. Over and over, Jacob cons everyone he meets until we come to this story this morning, this pivotal story about Jacob and his wrestling match. It is a match for the ages. Jacob is pitted against someone whose face we never see. This unknown wrestler's identity is withheld from us. Jacob himself never knows with whom it is he has wrestled all night. It is fascinating when we encounter the larger story of Jacob to see the ways he morphs through the course of that story, starting as a scrawny schemer in Canaan to growing up very fast as he flees for his life from his brother, to having the strength of Hercules as he rolls a stone back from a well so that his cousin Rachel could water her sheep. He was smitten with her the minute he saw her. Time goes by, 20 years to be exact, and Jacob has spent this time far away from his family of origin, living in the household of his uncle. He has gotten married twice. He has become very wealthy. But old habits die hard. He is still very much Jacob, the one who steals and supplants, the one who railed against the fate of being the younger son almost from the minute he was born and refused to play the part. And so in time, Jacob wears out his welcome yet again. And he must now flee. And God directs him that it is time for him to return to Canaan, to face up to his brother for the wrong that he has done him. So Jacob sets his wives on camels and takes with him his flocks and the wealth he has gained from outfoxing his crooked uncle, and heads back in the direction of the place he once fled. As he goes, it all floods back to him, slowly but surely, as it does when one returns home. The landscape becomes familiar. There is the grove of oaks where he and Esau once played. They were playmates once, before they were competitors, before he tricked him and robbed his brother and became his nemesis. Images arise to haunt him throughout the landscape, images of the wrongs he has done. Perhaps he has grown, but there has been so much duplicity, so much water has gone under that bridge. The time has come to make things right with Esau. But how will it go? And before that, we come to the wrestling match. Jacob must wrestle because he is afraid. He is afraid of Esau. He is afraid of what his future holds. He must wrestle because he has done wrong, and he knows it. But at its heart, this wrestling match is less about Jacob's wrongdoing and Esau's anger than it is about what Jacob must become, whom Jacob must become. We never learn the identity of the opponent, but Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann writes that it probably is God. And if it is God, there is much more to this wrestling match than initially meets the eye. Before Jacob can meet Esau, he must face God. And it is the unknown of God with whom Jacob will wrestle. This is God whose face cannot be seen, God in the full terror of mystery. Jacob wrestles all night long. Here perhaps we see glimpses of the man that Jacob has become, of the strength that he has gained in maturity and perhaps even in love. He wrestles all night long, seeming one moment to have gained the upper hand, seeming in another moment to have lost it, gaining and losing and gaining and losing strength again, until finally the unknown one strikes him on the hip. And even still, even limping in pain, Jacob will not let go when the wrestler asks him to let him go. Thinking himself strong, Jacob demands a blessing, as he has always done. Jacob has spent his life demanding blessings, often and usually blessings that were not his to have. Who knows what he asks for here? But he has not given it, not yet at least. The tables turn again, and the unknown wrestler asks him his name. Names are important. They're particularly important in the Bible. The name Jacob means heel grabber, supplanter, overreacher, trickster, because when they were being born, Jacob grabbed his older brother's ankle on the way out of the womb. He is as he has always been. Every word of that is 100% Jacob. But it's not flattering, even if it's true. As the wrestling match is nearing its end, the unknown wrestler tells Jacob that now he will have a new name. No longer will he be called Jacob with all of its history and hurt. No more can he be the grasping one who trusts no one. No, he must change. He must become Israel, which also has a meaning. It means God rules or God preserves, because he has striven with God and humans and prevailed. But even still, even with his new name, he has not yet received the blessing. And so Jacob holds on for dear life. He will not have wrestled all night for nothing. His hip is out of joint. His strength is spent, but he does not yet have what he demands, that all-important blessing from this mysterious stranger. And so finally, he asks the unknown wrestler, "What is your name?" And with that, the unknown wrestler blesses him and leaves. And Jacob named the place Peniel, which means the face of God. And Israel went on his way limping. Some blessings come easily. They are readily apparent. Some blessings, though, are not so obvious. Sometimes we must wrestle all night long to find the blessing. And sometimes that wrestling will leave us limping. And we may not even then know what blessing will yet be revealed. I don't know if we ever really stop wrestling with our past, wrestling as Jacob was with what he had been and what he had done and who he could yet be. And I don't even know that Jacob's wrestling match is really as simple as that, as simple as wrestling with the past. I mean, the truth is, we do all know that we must deal with our own demons, but here is a man who has striven with God and prevailed. This is no ordinary wrestling match, because this is no ordinary man. This is a bigger story, because it is a story in which God is involved. It would be a common story, a small story, if we make it only about Jacob, even with all of his past and all of his misdeeds. It becomes a holy story because God is involved. It becomes a holy story because it is God alone who can give blessings, and it is God who can change names, and it is God who can create newness where before there was only oldness and betrayal and pain. Jacob wrestled all night long, but he could not force the blessing. He had to wait. He had to wait. And then he was blessed. But he went on his way limping. As I think of this story of the wrestling and the blessing and the limping, I cannot separate it from another story in my mind, a story from my own past. I had a classmate at Princeton Theological Seminary who entered school knowing that he had lymphoma. He did not know whether he would live or whether he would die. He only knew that he was called to be there in that moment, and so he pursued this calling. One of my seminary classmates once said that he went to seminary, he went to the Air Force Academy thinking it would be just like Boy Scout camp, but with airplanes. And then he went to seminary thinking it would be just like Vacation Bible School with a little bit better teaching and communion instead of lay folks and goldfish crackers. And he said the longer he was there, the more he wanted the layfish and the goldfish crackers, the lay folks and the goldfish crackers. And I think there's truth to that, because anytime one is tested, anytime one's being is tested, think of your own life, you become bonded with those people who go through that testing with you. And so those who went through the faith testing of seminary together found themselves bonded to one another. And we as a class were deeply bonded to one another. And just a few weeks before we were to graduate, Buck's health took a turn for the worse and he died. When we gathered in the seminary chapel to have his memorial service, the preacher that night cited this text and said that we had come together to wrestle with God. She said, this only looks like a funeral. What we're really doing is coming together to wrestle with this experience, to see if a blessing can yet be had. As a friend of mine stood up to sing Buck's favorite hymn, He Leadeth Me, O Blessed Thought, he came to the line that read, O Lord, I would clasp thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur, nor repine. And it came to me, I thought in that moment, how very fine a line there is sometimes between holding God's hand and grabbing on for dear life to wring a blessing out of the unknown. Now, what I remember about this time, which it was joyful for us, but it was joy tinged with sadness. What I remember about this time is the way that it made us think differently about the vocations we were entering, of our time together, and what they meant. You see, we did wrestle for a blessing. And I think the blessing we were seeking was one with which we may all be familiar. We were wrestling for the blessing that only God can give, and that is the redemption of the world from sin and death. That is the blessing we sought. Nearly 2 decades have passed since that night, and my friends and I still remember it. We still remember the way that joy was tinged with loss and sadness. It is part of our memory. That is the limp. And I wouldn't presume to tell you what your limp is or how you have been hurt in life. But I do wonder sometimes if loss is not the very thing that binds us together, that most human of experiences. I wonder if that is the experience that we all share at some point in our life. And if it is, then we must surely all wrestle with it and wrestle with where God is in that experience of loss. As I said, it's been nearly 20 years since that night, but I remember it still. And over the space of time and distance, I've come to wonder, as we were wrestling with God, if God wasn't on our side. I think perhaps God was. And that is the funny thing about blessings. It is something of a rare thing to recognize them in real time. It frequently takes time and distance to see the ways that God is working. And through that time and distance, God never stops working on us. Names can change. New futures can be written. God never stops. Even if we wrestle all night long, God never stops, because God is always in the redemption business. So I guess I better tell you how the story ends. Jacob, who stole his brother's inheritance and ran away, came back home. And as he approached, he was so weaponized and ready for battle that he split his household into 2 camps, so that if one was destroyed, the other might yet live. He kept his favorites around him and sent the others out front. When the day of reckoning came, Jacob looked up And Esau was coming at him with 400 men behind him. And then Esau stopped. Families bring out the best and the worst in us. Sometimes we have to wrestle hard, and we will carry the limping with us for the rest of our lives. Some of us get our limps in other ways. But whatever it is, when the blessings come, it is the grace of God. Esau left the 400 men behind and ran to his brother and grabbed him and embraced him and wept. And Jacob, who had wrestled all night long with the unknown, who faced the full terror and mystery of God and all of God's redemptive, creative, terrible might, Jacob, for whom it was all over but the limping, said to Esau, "It is as though I have seen God's face, because you have shown me such grace." So where is the gospel in this old story of a family feud finally wrapped up? Where is the gospel in this story of wrestling and reaching, grasping and finally letting go? The gospel is that there is nothing that God cannot redeem. There is nothing that God cannot redeem, and there can always be a fresh start.